What's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I am back with a video where this time we're going to look at the 8 most disappointing teams in recent NBA history. It's pretty straightforward and we're going to rank them from best to worst. So with that being said, let's get right into the video. So first up on our list at number 8, we have the 07 Dallas Mavericks led by Dirk Nowitzki. That year Dirk, he was MVP, putting up crazy numbers on great efficiency. And looking at his Dallas team, they won an NBA best 67 games, and they actually could have gone for 70 if they didn't tail off towards the end of the season. Also looking at that team, they were 2nd in offensive rating, 5th in defensive rating, 2nd in net rating, and 4th in opponents' points per game. Top to bottom this Mavs team, they were deep and they had veterans. Not just Dirk, they had Josh Howard, Jason Terry, Devin Harris, as well as Jerry Stackhouse. And one thing I do have to note, in the previous year in 06, this Dallas team made the NBA Finals and blew a 2-0 lead to Miami Heat. And coming into 07, the expectations were sky high to get redemption for that big time choke. But unfortunately for Dallas in the first round, they played the 8-seeded Golden State Warriors with Baron Davis, Steven Jackson, Jay Rich, Matt Barnes, as well as Monte Ellis. That Golden State team blitzed Dallas, beating them in 6, and the final game they crushed them, beating them by 25 points. And keep in mind, Dallas, they were the 1 seed and the heavy favorite to make the finals coming out of the West. Now, speaking of a finals favorite, next up, the 2019 Celtics, led by Kyrie Irving. And very similar to Dallas, this Boston team was deep and they were stacked. Of course, they had Kyrie, they had Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Morris, Al Horford, Gordon Hayward, Terry Rozier, as well as Marcus Smart. That team went 8 guys deep, and they were expected to make the NBA Finals and possibly beat the Golden State Warriors. But if you guys remember, this Boston team was an absolute dumpster fire. They had chemistry problems, locker issues, the media was constantly on them, and in large part due to off-the-court activities, this Boston team only won 49 games, well short of their prediction to win 59 or even 60 games that year. Now, even with that being said, Boston still was the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference. And after a first-round sweep versus Indiana, they played the Bucks in the 2nd round. Now, this series in Game 1, Boston, they would actually win and upset the Bucks at home by 22 points. But in the following 4 games, this Boston team would crumble and they would self-destruct. And their quote-unquote leader, Kyrie Irving, in those 4 games was absolutely dreadful, averaging 19 points per game on pitiful 30, 19, and 91 splits with 3.5 turnovers. And of course, the icing on the cake for this series is that Paul Pierce, after Game 1, said this.
I don't know where Milwaukee goes from here because
Whoa. So is this over?
No, listen, I think it's over.
This series is over.
Yeah, they
One
lost.
game?
Now, of course, that is insult to injury, but that year's Boston team, they're a massive disappointment and fell way short of making the finals and possibly winning the championship. And moving on from Boston, we have their big-time rival, that being the LA Lakers, and specifically the 04 Lakers with Kobe, Shaq, Gary Payton, as well as Karl Malone. Now, of course, LA at this point with Shaq and Kobe, they'd already three-peated and they were proven NBA champions. But the 04 Lakers, from the jump, they were booked as the runaway champions. They were going to dominate and win the finals with ease. And to their credit, they had a pretty dominant year, winning 56 games, being top 10 offensive rating, defensive rating, net rating, as well as scoring. And their quote-unquote Big Four was definitely pretty dominant, with Kobe averaging 24, Shaq averaging 22, Gary Payton averaging 15, and Karl Malone averaging 13. After that, the roster completely dropped off to Slava Medvedenko, Devin George, Kareem Rush, even Derek Fisher. This was a very top-heavy team, but still had extreme talent to win the NBA championship. And once again, to their credit, they didn't make it very far, breezing through the Western Conference with a 12-5 record. And when it came to the NBA Finals versus Detroit, they were the heavy favorites versus a team that had no superstar or marquee player. But even with that being said, team basketball in this series would overcome LA, with Kobe shooting a pitiful 38%, Karl Malone shooting 33%, and Gary Payton shooting 32%. Regardless of age or injury, this final series was a massive upset and a massive disappointment for the 0-4 Lakers. Now, skipping ahead to our next team, were the Brooklyn Nets from 2021. And this Nets team was led by Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, as well as James Harden, who was traded for late in the season. And looking at all three of those players, in total that year, they only played 16 games together, having a 13-3 record. When they were on the floor playing, they were simply fantastic and great to watch. The only problem, they were rarely if ever on the court together playing basketball. And with that being the case, Brooklyn, they only won 48 games. They were still the best offensive team in the league, they were terrible defensively, and they were second in overall scoring. This Nets team had sky-high expectations, and some people said they had 3 top 15 players. And I don't want to lie to you guys, when this Big Three was formed, I thought the NBA was over and they were a surefire championship lock. Now, of course, with hindsight, we know that didn't happen, as Kyrie twisted his ankle and James Harden had a severe hamstring injury. Even with that being the case, Kevin Durant pushed the Bucks to 7 games and very nearly beat them with a late three-pointer. But with that being said, this Nets team still is a huge what if and a what could have been. Now, sticking in the 2020s, another big-time disappointment was the LA Clippers in 2020. This Clippers team in the offseason, they got Kawhi Leonard as well as Paul George. And some people dubbed them the best defensive duo since Jordan and Pippen. The expectations, they were sky high, and the hype for this duo as well as this team was out of this world. And looking at their roster, rightfully so. They had Kawhi Leonard, PG, Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams, Marcus Morris, Reggie Jackson, Landry Shamet, Zubac, Beverly, JaMychal Green, Mo Harkless, as well as Patrick Patterson. The depth on this roster is pretty insane, and having a duo like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, some thought would be unstoppable. And looking at the regular season, despite big-time injuries, this Clippers team was pretty well-rounded. They won 49 games, they were second in offensive rating, 5th in defensive rating, 2nd in net, and 4th in points per game. Definitely some pretty solid ranks for a Clippers team that was their best in franchise history. But of course, with them being the Clippers, something was bound to go wrong. And that one thing happened to be Paul George being an absolute slump. Look at some of PG's shooting games. 3 for 16, 3 for 14, 4 for 17, 4 for 16, 6 for 19, 7 for 19, as well as 4 for 10. Paul George in this playoff run got so much hate for his awful performances. And looking at their main superstar Kawhi Leonard, the defending champion, in Game 7, he absolutely folded. In that game, having 14 points, on 27% shooting, 2 for 7 from 3, and attempting 0 free throws. And in the fourth quarter, the duo of PG and Kawhi put up a donut, shooting 0% from the field. And did I forget to mention versus Denver, they blew a 3-1 lead in epic fashion. Now staying in LA, next up were the LA Lakers from 2013. And for this team, they had Kobe, they had Dwight Howard, Steve Nash, as well as Pau Gasol. And their depth was also pretty decent, having Metta World Peace, Antoine Jameson, as well as Steve Blake. And like all these teams, LA was booked to make the finals and possibly win the championship. But in a nightmare season, they only won 45 games, with their superstars being pretty banged up. Steve Nash only played 50 games, Pau Gasol played 49, and Dwight Howard, to his credit, played 76, was battling through severe pain for nearly half the year. And their superstar leader Kobe Bryant, he did play 78 games, and near the end of the year went all out to get LA in the playoffs. Looking at his last 10 games, which are really his last 10 ever prime games before injury, he averaged 29.9 points per game, 7.2 assists, 6.4 boards on 43, 23, and 86 splits. Kobe at age 34, pushing 35, did everything he could to get this dysfunctional roster in the playoffs. And speaking of that dysfunction, Dwight Howard was an awful fit. Him and Kobe butted heads relentlessly. They were basically polar opposite personality-wise, and even Steve Nash had on-the-court battles with Dwight, with both complaining at each other. It was an absolute nightmare on and off the court, and the worst thing is that Kobe this year got injured in large part due to this dysfunctional roster. And that's why I think it's pretty unanimous. The 2013 Lakers are at worst a top 3 most disappointing team in NBA history. Now, next up on our list, the 2 spot, we have the Heat from 2011. And I think all you guys know, this Heat team had the big 3 LeBron, D. Wade, as well as Chris Bosh. And universally, they were hated by every NBA fan during this season. And in spite of that hate, they had a pretty dominant year, winning 58 games, being the 3rd best offensive team, 5th best defensive team, number 1 in net rating, and 6th in opponents' points per game. Even without solid depth and a solid bench, the Heat's big 3 carried them, and they were the clear-cut favorite to win the championship. And to their credit, they made it to the finals, beating Philadelphia, Boston, as well as Chicago in the process. But when it came to the biggest stage versus Dallas, this Heat team absolutely crumbled, and specifically LeBron James had his worst series of all time. He was outplayed by Dirk, Jason Terry, Dwayne Wade, even Chris Bosh. And in large part due to that fact, Miami would lose in 6 games and one of the biggest upsets in NBA history. Now finally, getting to the number 1 spot, we have the Lakers for the 2022 season, once again with LeBron James. Also on this roster with Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, Malik Monk, Carmelo Anthony, as well as Dwight Howard. And like all these other teams, this Lakers team was the championship favorite, and at the very least should have made the NBA Finals. And of course, as you guys know, that is far from the case. As this Lakers roster on and off the court, they were dysfunctional and never got their groove. Also, they were old, injury prone, and their superstars simply didn't fit. Looking at LA this year, they only won 33 games, and they missed the play-in tournament, being 11th in the Western Conference. Also looking at how bad this team was, they were 23rd in offensive rating, 21 in defensive rating, 22nd in net, and 28 in opponents' points per game. They were slow, they played no defense, and their offense was downright pitiful. This Lakers team for NBA history defies all the odds. And looking at this list, there's at least one thing for every team they were good at, or at least decent at. And all these teams had a record above 500. Once again, this Lakers team won 33 games when coming to the year. They are booked as a championship favorite, and some experts said they could push winning 70 games. What more can you say about this team? All the aspects came together. You had LA, the media, bad defense, bad offense, a tough conference. I mean, it's pretty clear cut. The 2022 Lakers are by far the most disappointing team in NBA history. And with that being said, that is the end of the video. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.